All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. This is where I do an in-depth review of a recent RPG book published, and this particular series, I'm actually doing individual reviews of a book collection called Spelljammer Adventures in Space. I decided to split them into three different reviews because they are physically three different books, and they're very, very different as far as the people that are going to be interested in. However, they are only sold as a group of products, so it is impossible currently to buy any one of them individually. So my recommendation section, which will come right after this, is going to be a little bit weird because I'm going to be basing it on the full price of the collection, but there's two other books in the collection, so the recommendations are going to be a little bit weird. Today, I am going to be reviewing Light of Xaryxis. This is the third book in the bundle, and this is the adventure that comes with Spelljammer Adventures in Space. Now, my in-depth reviews are exactly that. They are in-depth. I go through these things chapter by chapter. I talk about the things I like, the things that I don't like, the things I think they did good, the things that I think they need to stop doing. But most people don't want to sit through an hour-long video just to figure out if they want to buy something. So I always start off in the beginning with a section called "Should you buy this?" and I separate potential buyers into the three groups. The first group are what I call players, and those are people that are basically primarily going to be playing a single character in a D&D game. They're not going to be sitting behind the GM screen. They're just going to be playing their own character. The second group is what I call DMs, and DMs are exactly that. They're the people sitting behind the DM's screen, running the adventure, maybe creating their own adventures from the material presented in there, and obviously DMs have much different needs than players do. The final group is a group that I call Lorehounds. Lorehounds may never sit at a D&D table in their lives, but they're interested in the source material. They're interested in the lore, in the stories, in the kind of in-universe explanations of how and why the things work. And so obviously they're going to have a very different set of needs than a player. So, should you buy this? Well, let's find out. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this stuff, please like the video, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. Let's get going. The first group, should players buy this? This is an adventure. In general, players should not be reading the text of the adventures because it will give away a lot of the things. And in this particular adventure, that is doubly sure because this adventure is written in a way where almost every situation that you get into, there are multiple outcomes that are accounted for in the adventure. And so not only will reading the adventure kind of spoil the game for you, but it will also reveal the kind of choices that your players may not have been aware of, and will give them an even more powerful edge in the game that they really shouldn't have. And for me personally, I think it would completely ruin the fun of playing this adventure if the players themselves read it. So this is the shortest ever section of this I've ever done, but should players buy this? No. Do not buy this particular book. Now, again, because it is a 3 books as a series and you can't buy the first one, which I recommended you buy, without buying this one, my recommendations as players, overall, I think this set is worth $50 for players. Even though you're primarily only going to be getting, or you're going to be getting the vast majority of your use out of the first book. So if you do buy the set, just don't read this particular book until after you've played the adventure. This is also one of the shorter adventures that they've published. It only takes you from 5th level to 9th level. So this this is not going to take you 2 or 3 years to get through. There's a good chance you could get through this in a couple of months if you have regular sessions. So yeah, wait until after the adventure, after you've played the adventure at least once, and then read the book and just see how interesting and unique this adventure is. Moving on. The second group, Dungeon Masters. Should Dungeon Masters buy this? I'm a huge fan of this adventure specifically. I will get more into it when I actually do the in-depth review. But overall, I think this is a brilliantly written adventure, and one of the reasons I like it so much. In general, pre-written adventures tend to be most useful for new DMs. I'm not saying established DMs can't run them, because there's a lot of really, really fun adventures that you can run as an established DM. Things like Curse of Strahd is really, really popular because it's a really great, well-written adventure. The one that came out before that, no, I can't remember what it's called. Out of the Abyss. Out of the Abyss is another one that's really, really fun to run. Descent from Baldur's Gate, I think is what it's called. It's another one that people have just said are really, really good, great. And then there's obviously, the adventure things like, what was it called? Tales from the Yawning Portal, things like that, where they basically just update old adventures so you can run them again. So I'm not saying that this is something that is only useful to new DMs. However, this particular adventure, not only is it well written and I think is really interesting and fun and presents a really fun story, but it is probably the best paced of any of the adventures. And again, I'll go into that in a little more detail when I talk about the introduction chapter in the in-depth review. But basically, the adventure is split up into 4 chapters, or 4, I guess, section, and then 4 sections, and each section has 3 chapters in it. There we go. Easy enough for me to say. And the nice thing about it is each chapter is designed to be run in about 2 to 3 hours. They're very kind of narratively driven. They actually, each one starts with a little kind of refresh of what happened in the last chapter. So this is actually a really, really good introduction for anyone that has never run an actual campaign. This gives you a really, really great outline about how to structure an adventure that's meant to be played over multiple game sessions with time in between those sessions. Most adventure books understand that you're not going to play it all in one sitting, but they are written as one continuous narration. And because of that, finding places to stop and figuring out exactly how to bring the characters back into it and how to keep the players engaged at the beginning and at the end, like that can be a very difficult thing for a new DM to learn. And this does it beautifully. Like every single end of every chapter, they have an end of chapter. They have a little kind of bit of box text at the end that lets you read something and then go, and that's where it ends this week. I'll see you guys at next session. It's really, really well paced. It also means, compared to most other books, like I have seen people that can run something like Curse of Strahd in 6 months, and I have people have Curse of Strahd where all they're doing are running the actual book campaign. And I've seen people run Curse of Strahd for years and not finish it. Your results will vary massively, but because they specifically say, by the way, this section is designed to take this much time, and because they put that particular time frame in there, that also means that the writers who were writing it knew, okay, anything that we put in this chapter needs to be completable in this amount of time. So they were very careful to make sure, okay, the story that we're telling, we're going to make sure it fits into this. Very similar to how like a television show would be written. If you're looking at this is something that has a kind of through plot through an entire season or multiple seasons, they have to break it down into 30-minute or 60-minute episodes, which depending on what you're writing for turns into like 23 minutes and 42 minutes respectively. But anyway, and so because of that, they have to understand, writing for a television show, very, very different than writing for a movie. And writing for kind of an episodic style television show is going to be very, very different than writing for something that has a more kind of through plot that keeps going episode to episode. And that's kind of what I get from this, is this feels kind of like a TV series, which is not a bad thing. I think it's a very, very good thing. And again, because that's how D&D is played, your average D&D session is generally supposed to last anywhere between about 2 to 4 hours. That's what most people play in a sitting. That's why the Adventurers League has 2-hour adventures and 4-hour adventures. And I don't know if they do this anymore, but they used to have these 8-hour adventures, and those were specifically designed effectively for convention play, or were designed for like marathon type things where you spend an entire day playing D&D. They generally only released 1 or 2 of those a season. Most adventures in early Adventure League play were all 4 hours, because 4 hours is the kind of standard time. In conventions, 4 hours is how long most D&D slots are. Every convention I've ever been a part of, they break everything up into 4-hour slots for RPGs in general. So this kind of limiting it to 3 hours does give the ability for people like me, who likes to embellish a little bit. Even when I ran Adventures League Adventures, I remember one adventure I ran, the intro to the adventure is about a paragraph long. And it just says, by the way, this is how the players get in. And then there's a little, like half a page interaction where they meet with this wealthy person who's going to hire them to do an adventure. And what I ended up doing is I role-played this situation of just showing off his just obscene amount of wealth. They came in and they were allowed to order any drink that they wanted. And so every single player ordered whatever they wanted, and every single person that got a drink, I described what the drink tasted like and how it looked and things like that. Like, I really, really upped it up to really make these people, this particular person, just look to be very, very wealthy, obscenely, disgustingly wealthy, especially with how the city he was living in was being treated at that particular moment. And it massively changed how the adventure went. It also meant that, a half a page that's supposed to take about 10 minutes took us the better part of an hour, but they really enjoyed that adventure. And I was able to kind of shore up the time in other places to still get the adventure done in about 4 hours. So with something like this, when they aim for 2 to 3 hours, you can stretch it to 4 hours, probably without too much difficulty if you have players that are really into role-playing. Otherwise, you can just stick to the 2 to 3 hours it's designed for. And most of the games that I run now, I can't run a 4-hour adventure anymore. My anxiety won't let me. So most of my adventures are around 2 hours. So this fits perfectly. So anyway, other than, the pacing and everything, the actual adventures themselves, and again, I'll talk more about it when I do the in-depth part. But the adventure itself is really interesting. There's plenty of combat in here for people that like combat. There's not an obscene amount. This is not a combat adventure with a light story woven in. This is a full adventure that has combat, that also has other things. There's some kind of politics stuff that you get to deal with. There's something that I really, really enjoy, which is the literary term is what's called an unreliable narrator. There's situations multiple times in this book where you can try and get information from people, and there are certain NPCs in this that believe things that aren't true. Those NPCs have been lied to, and they believe the lie. So even with something like a zone of truth or something, they would still tell something that is not true because they firmly believe that it is. And so, depending on how the players play, they may be given false information. And even with really, really good insight checks, there's no possible way for them to know that this information is false. And I really, really like that, because it is true in real life, and it really gets annoying to me when players will kind of treat things like insight as a magical truth detector that means they can never be lied to if they have an high enough insight. No, because there are certain people. First of all, there are certain people that are amazing liars, and they're always going to be able to lie to you. And the only thing you're going to be able to do is you won't be able to tell they're lying, but you'll be able to tell what they're saying isn't true because it conflicts with other facts that you find. But there's nothing you can do to them to ever get the hint that they're lying because they're just that good. And then there are people like these NPCs that literally believe things that are wrong. If you look in the world right now, there is a massive, massive part of the population that flat out, firmly 100% believe things that are 100% wrong, that have been disproven over and over and over again. And there's nothing that you can do to convince them that this is wrong. And if you ask them for this information under pain of death, they will always tell you this information that is 100% wrong. And so the fact that this story has that in it, I really like. I also like the idea of an unreliable narrator because, again, I think players become a little bit too dependent on the idea that they can know everything, and if they make the right roles and play their characters right, they can never be wrong. Isn't that how it works in the real world? You can do everything right and still be wrong. You can do everything right and still lose. And so I like that. I think it's really cool. The rest of the thing, like I said, I'm gonna go chapter by chapter through this. It's really, really good. Or part by part. I'm not gonna do chapter by chapter. But it's a well-written adventure. The one problem I have with it, which is the problem I've had with all of these, and again, I will talk about it more when it comes up in the review, the dialogue is really shitty. And I guess it does kind of vary, but the dialogue goes from, oh dear God, did a computer write this, to, oh wow, that was boring. Like, the good dialogue is, I guess it wasn't bad. And because it's paired up with this just truly awful dialogue, when you get dialogues, you're like, I guess that works. There's nothing fun about it. There's nothing interesting about it. I guess it's fine. It makes the boring dialogue actually sound good. So congratulations, you've made mediocre look spectacular. But yeah, otherwise, so do I recommend this for DMs? Yes, for the $50 digital version. The only issue I have with this being quote unquote $50, and again, you get 2 other books for $50, so it's not really an issue. But if they were to try to sell this individually as $50, the length of the adventure is a little bit too short for a $50 price tag. The fact that you also get Boo's Astro Menagerie and Astro Adventures Guide, it is hard to not recommend this to DMs. If they ever sell this individually, even if they put a $30 price tag on it, like a lot of the other adventures, I still think it's worth $30. I think it's that well-written an adventure, other than the dialogue. And then for the physical, again, I think DMs get more out of physical books, and $20 more for a DM screen, a pull-out map, or a fold-out map, and then physical copies of all the books, I think is a steal. So yeah, overall, DMs, do I recommend this? Heck yes. Moving on. The final group. Lorehounds. Should Lorehounds buy this? This one is actually kind of interesting. Because of the kind of episodic nature of it, this one actually reads as one of the better campaigns as far as just like reading through it as you would a book. Because it is episodic, because it has little things, like it does feel like you're reading a chapter book. The writing itself, like I said, except for the dialogue, the writing itself is really good. And there are 2 sections in here. There's a thing called Wildspace System Doomspace and Wildspace System Xaryxis Space. Or Xaryxis Space. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's Xaryxis in space. They smush it together and remove one of the S's, because Xaryxis ends with an S and space begins with an S. So you smush it together. It's a weird word. So those 2 sections are just kind of explanations of those 2 systems, effectively. Those 2, what in previous versions would be called a crystal sphere, which is effectively like a campaign setting. So those are those two different things, and those are actually really, really interesting. Again, for DMs, it's useful as well, but for Lorehounds, you have this at the end of 2 different chapters in 2 different parts. At the end, you'll have this very long thing that's just lore, and a really pretty map, and explains how everything works. It goes into some of the politics and things of how stuff works. So overall, this is actually a really, really good book for Lorehounds. As far as is it worth the $50? On its own, again, it's a little bit short to be worth $50. But when you add in Astral Adventures Guide and Boo's Astral Menagerie, all 3 of these books are useful for Lorehounds. Astral Adventures Guide is going to have the most information. Boo's Astral Menagerie, probably the least amount of information, but still a lot. And then Light of Xaryxis is going to be kind of in the middle. But all of them are going to have really interesting things that you can really enjoy reading. And who knows, perhaps reading this adventure might be the thing that changes you from only a Lorehound or primarily a Lorehound, to possibly a Lorehound player. Or maybe even a Lorehound DM. Who knows? But yeah, overall, Lorehounds, do I recommend Light of Xaryxis? Yes, I do. I think either the $50 digital version or the $70 physical version. And I will mention again, the $70 physical version is the MSRP, the manufacturer's suggested retail price. I don't think I have seen it sold anywhere for $70 online. Obviously, I would assume most game stores would be selling it for $70 because they need to make money to be a game store. But if you look around, there's a good chance that you can find it for a lower price. But I'm always going to make my recommendations based on the MSRP, because in general, if you walk into a game store, that's probably what you're going to find it for. So, quick review. For players, don't read Light of Xaryxis. Don't buy it if it's sold individually. This is not a piece for you until after you've played it. Afterwards, feel free to read it, because I think it'd be really interesting for you to realize just how many choices you didn't realize you had. I think that's cool. For DMs, buy Light of Xaryxis. It's a really, really well-written adventure. One of my favorites. And it is especially good for new DMs, or just DMs that have never quite mastered the art of kind of pacing. This is a great primer on pacing. And then for Lorehounds, pick it up. It's a really interesting read. It reads very similar to a chapter book with a lot more numbers in it. So yeah. That is my in-depth review recommendations. If you are just here to find out whether or not you should buy it, thank you for coming. Remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. This is very much kind of an interesting high seas style adventure. There are pirates. There's sea monsters. There's all kinds of cool stuff in here. So let me know in the comments down below, what is your favorite high seas style adventure? Is it something kind of pirate themed? Is it more the idea of exploring the unknown? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, it's time for the in-depth review. Quick reminder, the in-depth review is exactly that. I'm going to go chapter by chapter, including the introduction. I'm going to talk about the things I like, the things I don't like, the things I think they did well, the things I think they need to stop doing. So, with that being said, let's dive into the first section. I'm going to drink again. And again, if anyone's wondering why I'm drinking sugar water, this is ginger ale, and it's because I am still, because of anxiety and all these other things, I'm still very, very nauseated almost constantly, and ginger is a natural anti-nausea thing, and one of the few things that doesn't affect serotonin levels. So, yes, that's why I'm drinking it. Normally, I drink water. I promise. So, the first group, or the first chapter thing, Introduction. Wildspace awaits. This is your basic, this is how you run this adventure. It starts off with a thing that says, hey, if you're a player, don't read this. That's good. But the next thing is an adventure summary, and it's really nice. It is short, succinct, and it tells you pretty accurately what to expect as far as a broad narrative. Now, it does not go into the nitty-gritty. Do not assume that the adventure summary is telling you absolutely everything that the players are going to do. It doesn't. It leaves out a lot of the best stuff because the stuff doesn't, they had to condense a really long adventure into a couple of paragraphs. But it's a good summary. And I like having these things because this is something I used to do in the Adventures League is I'd read the summary and I would use that for my own pacing. So I would know, okay, I know what's going to happen, and I could actually just keep the summary page in front of me because I knew when we got to the next big section in the summary, I go, okay, well, if we have 4 hours, because running at conventions, you have to stick to the schedule. You cannot go over, because that means not only is it possible that you are stopping someone else from using the table that you're using, meaning another group is being put out, it also means that the players that you are playing with are not going to be able to get to their next game on time. And it means that you're screwing up their schedule and may make them miss out on something, because depending on what it is, they may not be able to join into it a little late. So conventions specifically, you have to stick to the time schedule. There is no wiggle room. It's one of the reasons why when I used to run conventions, all of my D&D slots that I would make would be 4.5 hours instead of 4 hours, simply to allow that additional half hour of leeway to time, so that players would have plenty of time to pack up their stuff, get to their next game, and sit down before the next game started. And if there were games that went over, they had a half an hour of leeway to be able to wrap up anything that they needed to do. So anyway, so Adventure Summary is nice. The next section talks about Xaryxis itself, which is a huge part of the lore. And this is the first section where if the players read this section, I mean, technically the adventure summary will spoil things, but they might go, okay, well, I'm just not going to read the summary, and I'll read the background. This section on Xaryxis gives huge plots. This is spoilers. So literally, even this first little thing, if players read it at all, they're going to spoil the adventure for them. But that being said, it's interesting stuff. And then the next section is called Adventure Structure. And this is where it specifically sets out. So I'm going to read the first paragraph because it explains it better than I'm going to. This adventure has 4 parts, each divided into 3 chapters. Each chapter is designed to be run as a single play experience lasting 2 to 3 hours, with the expectation that a group should be able to complete the adventure in 12 sessions of play. So what that means is if you run a weekly D&D game, which is not an uncommon thing to do, you should be able to get through this entire adventure in roughly 3 months. Because each month normally has about 4 of any one day in it. So if you have your weekly D&D on Wednesdays, there's generally 4 Wednesdays in every month. At least 4 Wednesdays. Sometimes there are 5. There's at least 4 Wednesdays. So each 1 month will be part 1. 1 month will be part 2. 1 month will be part 3, and then 1 month will be 1 month will be part 1 and then the start of part 2, because they're 3. So the parts won't. I made this much more confusing than it needs to be. Ignore the parts. Each week will be a single session. You'll go 4 sessions, 4 sessions, 4 sessions. You'll be done with it. It'll be really cool. And then they actually go part by part and go, this particular part has this thing. This particular part deals with this thing. This particular part deals with this thing. This particular part deals with this thing. And that's another thing that I like about how they kind of subdivided things, because each chapter is basically a complete thought. But each part is 3 different thoughts that all circle around the same basic premise and theme. So each time you go to a new part, you can pretty much assume that the theme of what you're doing is going to change. One is going to be very heavily focused on kind of fleeing destruction. Another one is going to be much more focused on learning about, different cultures and trying to make friends in a situation where you're surrounded by enemies. Each one is going to have this little kind of theme around it, and it really makes it significantly easier prep work wise to know what you need to focus on. One sections may have more combat or may have different kinds of combat. One may be a lot more, or one is a lot more ship to ship combat focused, while another one has significantly more kind of ground combat. Some of them are going to deal with politics, while other ones are going to deal more with just interpersonal relations and things like that. I really like how they subdivided this. And again, for a new DM, this is a fantastic primer on, hey, do you want to run more complex adventures? Then, okay, here's the dungeon I created for you. Players, go do cool things in the dungeon. Or here's the big baddie, and here are the bad things he's going to do. Players, try and stop him. This is a much more complex narrative. And the goal of the players tends to change from part to part. Because as they shift through this process, again, they find out information that is wrong in certain parts. And when they find out it's wrong, they have to shift their perspective. And they meet new characters who reveal new things and give them new choices. And so each time you shift to a new part, it's going to kind of change how the players view the world, and it's going to change their goals. So if you've never run a very much complex campaign, this is a really good primer on it. It is, and again, we'll go through it in the specific chapters, but it is a little bit more linear than some people are going to like, but there's enough choice built into it that it's not going to really feel linear for most of the time. The choices that the characters make are going to feel realistic to where it doesn't feel like the DM is forcing them to go in a certain direction. The choices that the players are given feel like natural choices they would want to make. And again, most choices have multiple outcomes that the players can choose from. So as much as, yes, any pre-written adventure is going to be linear, it has to be. This one I think is probably one of the more open-ended ones I've ever seen, which is nice. And again, all of that in this little section of adventure structure is kind of explained pretty well. And then they have a running the adventure section, which is just your kind of, hey, this is how you read this. They explain box text. They explain, creature names are always bolded in I'm going to try this again. In D&D adventures. If you're ever reading and you see a name in bold, that means that particular word is the name of the creature's stat block. So a lot of times you'll say, well, this is Captain Firebrand, who is a Buccaneer pirate. And Buccaneer pirate will be bolded. Well, that means if you look up the phrase Buccaneer pirate in the monster manual or wherever that particular stat block is supposed to be, you will be able to find their stat block. So anytime you see something in bold in a pre-written adventure, that means that's a stat block that you're going to need for them. It's something that DMs that have run pre-written adventures will just know. And if you're in a digital one, anytime a creature's name is in bold, if you hover over it with your mouse, the stat block pops up and you can click on it. So anyone that's run them digitally, that's really, really obvious. But anyone that's ever run a physical book and they never read this section, they're not going to really understand why they always bold these names. And so just this little section is really nice. But other than that, if you've run a pre-written adventure, ignore this. The next section is called Adventure Inspiration, and it talks specifically about the stuff that inspired this. And they specifically mention the 1980s film Flash Gordon and the comic strip that inspired Flash Gordon from the 30s. So if you want a feeling of how this adventure should feel, and that's something as a DM you should be aware of, not just, you know, what are you know the what's the mechanical things that I need to know? Do I know the system well? Do I know the story well? Do I know all the NPCs? But you should also be aware of what the campaign is supposed to feel like. And this is something I don't see a lot of pre-written adventures doing as well as this. This one specifically says Flash Gordon. Go watch Flash Gordon. Read the Flash Gordon comic strips. This is what this is supposed to feel like. If you play something like, I'll bring up Curse of Strahd again because it is a very particular thing. They do have a little section in there that says, by the way, this is a gothic horror style adventure. It should feel a certain way. They don't do this for Out of the Abyss, but Out of the Abyss is very, very heavily involves the idea of demonic corruption and people kind of losing sense of reality as demons start influencing everyone else and making them lean into their vices and things like that. And so understanding that aspect of the adventure is essential for running the adventure the way it's meant to be and for the players to really get it. So I like the fact that it has this little adventure inspiration thing. I do love this little line they have in there. They go, watch the 1980s Flash Gordon film. It's not Shakespeare or Scorsese, but the dialogue is quotable and the costumes and sets are fantastic. I love the fact that they're like, watch Flash Gordon. It's not great, but it's very quotable and the costumes and sets are really good. I love that. So many people, especially nowadays, so many people, if a movie or a book or a television show comes out and it is not the most awe-inspiring, you know, if it doesn't have, you know, something to say about current politics, or it doesn't have something to say about the human condition, and it isn't really, really kind of important, they're like, oh, this is a dumb movie, no one should watch it. No, there are movies, there was a time when people made movies that were just fun. And Flash Gordon is a perfect example of something, and it's just fun. It's not good. By kind of movie standards, it's campy and it's over the top, and the acting is laughable in places, and the plot itself is absurd, but it's fun. It's really, really fun, and that's what this adventure is supposed to be. Though I will say, this adventure is probably slightly more grounded than Flash Gordon is. Really, go watch the movie. It's a great movie. It's an enjoyable movie. I can't say that it's great, but it's a really enjoyable movie. Then they have a section on character creations, and that's one of the big things about this we'll talk about in the next chapter. But this adventure starts on a regular place. Like, you could start it in Faerun or something, and then something really, really big happens, and the planet they're on starts to get destroyed. So character creation can take a lot of ways. You could be spelljammers that just happen to land on a planet. You could be adventurers that have only ever existed on this planet. They may have no idea about spelljammers or anything like that, or it may be something that they never considered, and this is basically their introduction to the world of spelljamming, the world of Wildspace. Also, characters start at level 5 for this, so they do have a little a guide in here that mentions creating 5th level characters and how you can do that to make it feel other than just creating a character at 5th level. They talk about, well, give them a little extra money. If you're playing in a high magic campaign, maybe give them a single uncommon magic item, something like that. So then they talk about character advancement. Character advancement like this is milestone. Basically, at the end of every part, you gain a level. So at the end of part 1, you go from level 5 to level 6. End of part 2, you go from level 6 to level 7. Part 3, you go 7 to 8. At the end of part 4, when you complete the adventure, you would go from level 8 to level 9. And then these characters are free to do whatever they want. And then the final section is where to begin. And this kind of gives you an idea about how to put this in an already established world, or how maybe you want to play this adventure, but you don't want to create, your players don't want to create 5th level characters. So you basically run an adventure that runs them from 1 to 5, and then once they hit 5th level, this stuff, the inciting incident of this adventure begins. That's what this little section is okay, well, this is how you can insert it into a campaign. And again, because chapter 1 starts with, by the way, your planet is about to explode. This is a really, really kind of interesting way to kind of go, okay, well, you know how we were going to try and stop this evil baron from leveling more taxes against the population and just kind of try and dethrone him so someone better at. Well, now the world's about to end, so maybe we can deal with tax problems later. So you can do that. Now, understand, if you start a campaign with the players with the idea of that, oh, we're going to overthrow this, evil baron, and then we're going to deal with the larger kingdom, and then, if they think it's going to be a quote-unquote planet-bound adventure, and then you go, oh, by the way, the planet's blowing up, you guys are going into space to fight space dragons. That may be jarring for some players, and it may upset them. So understand, if you're going to introduce this to the players, let them know in advance, by the way, this first part of the adventure is just to get you up to level 5. So yeah, that is the introduction. Moving on. Part 1. Seeds of Destruction. I have to mention, the artwork in this is really, really good. And it does go through quite a few different styles. In the opening to Seeds of Destruction, they have this really cool, oil paint style picture. It almost has an impressionistic feel to it, because the lines are very unclear, and as much as there are, multiple people that are looking your way, because it's a crowd in a city, a lot of their faces don't have much detail in them, so this is it has almost an impressionistic feeling to it, which I think is really, really good. And then you will have other art that is significantly more kind of photorealistic, and you'll have some art that's going to feel a little bit more kind of cartoony. Like, there's a lot of different styles in here, which I personally enjoy, because it does give different feelings. Different art styles invoke different emotions in people, and I think the more kind of impressionistic, kind of blurry almost look to this first picture really does make it feel a little bit scarier and a little bit more unknown, because you can't tell a lot of facial features in here. You can't really tell 100% what's going on completely, because expressions are a little bit more difficult to read. The edges of buildings are more difficult to see. Whatever's happening in the background is a little blurrier than you would normally think. And because of that, you don't, just from looking at the picture, you don't really know what's going on, but you can tell something very, very wrong is going on, because the clearest picture, the clearest face in the picture, in the very front, you see this little girl in a dress with a little kind of bonnet on it, and she's holding what looks like a stuffed tabaxi, and she just has these big wide eyes, and her mouth is open, and she looks terrified, that she's looking at something that is terrifying her. And everyone else, their body language screams, terror and the things like that. But it's very kind of muted and things. So I think it's a really effective choice for this as a style. Moving to the actual adventure itself, this is really, really, this is a really, really nice way to begin this, because it begins, it begins with basically a star shower. There's been, over the past few nights, there's just been kind of a torrent of shooting stars in the sky. And so people are talking about it. And that's what the opening box text talks about, is like, oh, well, everyone's talking about, all the falling stars and stuff like that, and whether it's a sign from the gods or something like that. And it's a really, really cool thing until the falling stars start actually falling. And then bad stuff just starts happening. And this is where my biggest problem with most of the new D&D adventures is they put box text. And for anyone that's not familiar with what box text is text that is designed to be read directly to the players. Because of that, box text needs to be well written, for a number of reasons. First of all, the better written it is, the easier it is for you to say. And so poorly written text is difficult to speak, and therefore it's going to be difficult to you to say it to the players. Second of all, it's actually setting the tone. These are the few parts where the DM gives up the reins to the writers themselves. And so if the box text is not well written or doesn't fit with the feeling of the adventure, it's going to really, really derail the adventure. And that's what the dialogue does here. I'm going to read only one paragraph of the first set of box text just to kind of explain what it is. You're just finishing your midday meal while listening to a blacksmith tell about being awakened last night by a loud crash. According to the smith, a crystalline vine burst out of the ground and punched a hole through the roof of his neighbor's bakery. Must be divine punishment for the bad pies and steep prices, says the blacksmith with a nervous chuckle. Suddenly, the earth shakes violently beneath your feet. You hear the dull roar of a distant eruption. The smith and several others hurry outside. Joining them, you see a sinuous, crystalline vine erupting from the ground a few blocks away, tall enough to be seen above the rooftops. Screams of panic rise from the same direction. So for the most part, it's a pretty well-written thing. I really like the phrase, you hear the dull roar of a distant eruption. That is a lot better than you hear a noise outside. The dull roar of a distant eruption adds so much more flavor and so much more meaning to what is going on, and really paints a picture. However, must be divine punishment for the bad pies and steep prices is a dumb line. And then says the blacksmith with a nervous chuckle. And again, I understand, and I guess I'm going to read the next because it's just a sentence. I'm not going to read every single bit of box text, but a sailor standing in your midst says, "I think it's time I return to my ship. You're welcome to join me. You would be wise to flee as well." With that, she makes her way towards the docks. That is the most boring, flavorless, feelingless line there is. And the character they're introducing there is a really, really cool character. And that is what 99% of the dialogue is in this, is this incredibly bland, hi, plot point, 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 plot point. Like and that was really, really hard to say. So all of you should be liking the video right now because I got through that. A lot of that's what the dialogue is, and it's so boring and flat. And again, I understand why they did this. They kind of explained it in Journeys to the Radiant Citadel, where they specifically said, "Don't use accents; they might be offensive," which is a joke. Especially coming from Dungeons and Dragons, where all dwarves are from a part of Scotland that doesn't exist. And people butcher a Cockney accent so bad that even Dick Van Dyke's going, "Oh no!" Yeah, it's just so the reason they did this is they're like, well, we don't want to write accents into our characters because that might be considered cultural appropriation. That might be considered, using some sort of stereotypes that we don't want to do. Because a lot of people associate accents with stereotypes. Now, I studied accents for years, for over a decade, particularly in relation to my acting career. I wanted to kind of be like Christian Bale. Not so much the Christian Bale that's the method actor who's a complete douchebag. No, I'm talking about the Christian Bale where he gives flawless accents. Christian Bale, if I remember correctly, Christian Bale is Welsh. He's from Wales. And the Welsh have a very particular accent. It's an accent that I've tried to learn because it's this really nice sing-songy kind of accent. It's a really, really cool, interesting accent. Now with all the crap going on in my brain, I have a hard time learning any accents. But anyway, so I've studied accents, and I've studied a lot of different accents. And as much as there are some people that will associate stereotypes with accents. And there are certain accents that are just stereotyped because people don't really speak that way, or the few people that do really speak that way aren't really like that. A really common one for an American audience is your standard kind of Southern hick accent. "Oh boy, Dale, we just gonna go over here and that has this stereotype of being incredibly dumb, racist, backwards people. That accent as a whole doesn't technically exist. Yes, there are some people that speak very similar to that. There are some people that speak exactly like that. I've met a couple of them. But the stereotype built into it isn't real. And the accent that a lot of people think of is an extremely exaggerated version of a real accent. So as much as, yes, you may find one or two or maybe the entire, family or town that speaks and it sounds very similar, it's not. It is a very different accent. And accents themselves generally are not going to fit into a stereotype. I have seen unbelievably, incredibly smart people speaking with a southern drawl, and they have said things that would blow your mind. And not just, kind of like, well, have you ever looked at the sky and wondered if there's that many stars out there, how can we be alone in the universe? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like, well, if you look at the if you look at the size of the muons and real technical stuff, Southern people are not stupid. And the same thing is true of accents in the UK. A lot of people don't realize that there's more than two accents in the United Kingdom. In Britain itself, go 100 miles and you'll have a different accent. Something as simple as Manchester and Liverpool and Salford are three towns. Manchester is a big town. Liverpool is a significantly smaller town. And Salford is even smaller than that. And a Mancunian accent is different than a Liverpudlian accent, and is different than a Scouse accent, which you've never heard the term Scouse. Scouse is a derogatory term for someone from Liverpool generally, but from the Manchester area completely. A Mancunian accent sounds like this, and it has this very strange way of talking. Whereas if you go to a Liverpudlian accent, you kind of start sounding like the Beatles, because the Beatles were from Liverpool, and so they can say things like, what was it? Oh, I've completely forgotten this. If I told you, wow, I used to have lines for this, and I can't think of any of them. My line just completely blank. If I told you I was being followed by a yellow submarine, would you believe me? I didn't think so. Could have sworn it was a yellow submarine. Well, that wouldn't be possible now, would it? Maybe it's one of those unidentified flying cupcakes, or a figment of my own imagination. But I don't have an imagination. So that's a Liverpudlian accent. And then a Scouse accent. The only way I can get into a Scouse accent is I have to use a particular activation phrase. And the activation phrase is, I'd like a Coke and a buckle of beer. And that's a Scouse accent. And it's just really thick and you can't actually understand what they're saying a lot and it sounds kind of drunk. But that's a Scouse accent. And by the way, if you use the term Scouse anywhere in the greater Manchester area, you will get punched. Again, it's a derogatory term, but it's a name of an accent. So accents themselves are not racist. Accents are ways that people speak. It is only when you start implying that somehow the way that people speak is connected to definable features about their personality, about their... Generally, accents are connected with intellectual ability. And there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. Michael Caine is an incredibly intelligent person. He's a brilliant actor. He speaks with a Cockney accent. And he actually not really got in trouble. He was, he made a lot of news in England when he started getting jobs and things like that, because part of becoming an actor was you were not allowed to have a lower class accent. You know, you weren't allowed to have a West Country accent or a Cockney accent, which is effectively London, or a Mancunian accent. No, you had to have what they call a toff accent, which is what most people think of when they think of a British accent. They go, oh, it's a British accent. Well, everyone talks like this. This is a toff accent. If you really want to have fun, if you learn a Royals accent, which the Royals accent is, and it's not just for like the royal family, but kind of like it's a super tough accent, and it is a really, really weird thing because as Americans we don't really hear royal accents much at all. But anyway, so Michael Caine made this huge deal because he never lost his Cockney accent, and that was one of the prereqs for becoming an actor in England. Was, okay, you learn the right accent or we're not going to give you jobs. Because in England, the only way we want the rest of the world seeing us is we are the British people and we all talk like this. And that's not true. Again, England has such a massive variety of accents, and they're brilliant and they're beautiful. And so this idea of, well, we're not going to put accents in there is this over reaction to, well, we don't want to use racist tropes and the things like that. They overcorrected so much that they're in the ditch of a different road. They overcorrected so much to where they went from, we're not going to write accents in, which, to be perfectly honest, writing an accent into prose is difficult to do in general. Because depending on how you write it, it may become unreadable. One of my favorite authors, Raymond E. Feist, writes accents into his work. And for me, it was never particularly difficult to understand it because I hear the lines in my head when I read them. And so when I would read it, I would just kind of say it to myself in my head in the accent. And I'm really good at understanding really hard to understand accents. So it made perfect sense to me. But a normal person that's not crazy like me had issues with some of the dialogue because some of it was written in such a thick accent that you literally had to pronounce it out loud to understand what they were saying. So I understand writing accents is difficult. Writing character into your dialogue is not racist. And I think it's time I return to my ship. You're welcome to join me. You would be wise to flee as well. Is not flavor. Is there's no character in that. There's no urgency. Nothing. Again, A giant Jack and the Beanstalk style crystal vine has just erupted out of the ground and is getting bigger by the second. The world is ending. Saying, I think it's time I return to my ship. You're welcome to join me. You would be wise to flee as well. Doesn't make sense. Even in the situation of you want to create a character that, kind of like the Doctor, when crazy things happen around the Doctor, goes, oh, that's fascinating. Perhaps we should get out of here. What do you all think? That kind of thing where they know something that everyone else doesn't, and because of that, they're not surprised. There's still character in that writing. Like the Doctor has never gone, I think it's time to return to my ship. You're welcome to join me. It's always, oh, isn't that fascinating? Yeah, I think I've outstayed my welcome here. It's been lovely, everyone. I'm going to get out of here. By the way, if you want to join me, I wouldn't be opposed to it. That has character to it. This is, I think it's time I return to my ship. An AI wrote my dialogue to be inoffensive. Have I offended you in any way? If I have, please let me know at the following email address, and we will pay you lots of money. I hate this so much. Again, it would be better if they just got rid of dialogue completely in box text. Again, if it wasn't in the box text, it wouldn't matter. Because box text is the only time that the DM gives away the reins to the writers. Everything else, the DM can control and everything that. But again, box text is designed to be read directly to the players. And forcing the player to rewrite your box text kind of defeats the purpose of box text. And again, I know some people that never read box text to their players. I know specifically it says in this adventure, either read the box text directly to them or summarize it to them. So even in the book itself, it says you don't have to read it. But the entire point of box text is to be read aloud. That's why it's put in a box. And when they put this unbelievably horrible flat dialogue, it ruins all of the nuance and all the interesting things in here. And the character that they're introducing is called Elena Sartell. She is a major part of this part of the adventure, at least. And she's a really cool character. Like, she is. And she's, like, the artwork of her is really, really cool. Like, she's got a scimitar, and she's got a bandana, and cool, like, red hair, and she's wearing, like, a kind of like a jerkin style thing. I don't know. Like, she's just cool looking. And I could not imagine the character they painted, and they give you a nice description of the captain herself. Like, they actually give a little explanation of her, as they do most NPCs. They'll give you a little primer on, hey, this is how to play this NPC. So I mean, she's a cool NPC, and again, her introduction to the entire thing is, I think it's time I return to my ship. You're welcome to join me. You would be wise to flee as well. It annoys me. Anyway, so the rest of this part, you basically have to deal with the fact that these vines are shooting up everywhere and the world is exploding. And I'm not going to go into too many details and stuff like that, but they actually give you a couple different ways to deal with this. And this is one of the few times where it does become kind of very railroady. Because to continue the adventure in a kind of natural way, what you're supposed to do is you follow the captain, and you get to her ship, and her ship happens to be a Spelljammer, and you actually get off the planet. That's what's supposed to happen. However, they even write in, you are perfectly able to decide, no, we don't want to be in this city. We're going to just run out of the town, because being in a city where buildings are falling and things like that, maybe not a great idea. If we get out of town, we can get away from the vines, and then we can figure out what to do. That is another completely valid choice. However, because the world is ending and the only way to save the world is to leave it, what eventually happens is the captain comes back and just picks you up for no explicable reason. Like, again, tons of people probably fled this city. Would make perfect sense, but for some odd reason, the captain that just happened to be eating with you, actually, I can't remember if he was in. The captain just happened to be sitting next to you in the adventure when it started. Just goes, "Oh, you seem nice. Why don't you come on my ship?" And, "Oh, look, there's the people that I saw once. Let us go back to the planet in danger and scoop them up." So, that's the little bit railroady. It has to be, because for the rest of the adventure is set in space. You have to get to space somewhere, somehow, so they do kind of do that. And again, the way that the adventure, at least for chapter 1, is written, it does give you a lot of incentive for the players to go that way. So, if the players make the decision that they really should, unless the players are specifically trying to quote-unquote break the campaign and do exactly the opposite thing of what they should be doing, they're going to be led in that direction. It's going to be the direction that makes the most sense. They do mention, okay, well, again, if players want to try and just go, well, no, that's where the DM wants us to go, so we're going to go in the opposite direction, we'll actually write out what happens if they do that. And we'll have an explanation for that. So that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 goes, you actually go into space. You get to be aboard a ship called the Moon Dancer, which is really, really cool. They have one of my favorite characters ever. It's called Flapjack the Flumph. Flapjack the Flumph is a flumph. If you don't know what a flumph is, you need to, because they're amazing. They're basically psychic jellyfish. And the flumph with eyes. They have eyes on little stalks. They're adorable. That is their Spelljammer. And a Spelljammer is someone who drives the ship effectively. So your ship is driven by a flying psychic jellyfish with a pirate hat. It is amazing. I love Flapjack. Flapjack is my new favorite character. Then they give you, a map of the Moon Dancer. And they give you maps of a lot of different ships. And the reason why is there's a lot of combat on the ships. And so having the maps there means if people want to use minis and stuff like that, you literally can just put the map into like Roll20 or whatever you want, and it works perfectly. And then they give you kind of an overview of the ship. And this generally happens every time you come to a new area. They give you a little primer on, this is the area. This is what is every single place. So if the party does decide, well, we want to go here, you have everything. You have everything there, and then you get attacked by a thing called a star moth, which is another vessel. And this is the other thing I really like about this adventure is they introduce so many different Spelljammer vessels, so many different kinds, and each one has a full crew and has a whole, each one feels very, very different. Each encounter feels very, very different, and I love it. So there's some ship-to-ship battle. There's the ability to board and stuff like that. You can do stuff like that. You can capture some of the people from the other ship. This is where that unreliable narrator comes in, where you can question some of the crew and find out things that specifically isn't true, but the crew members don't know that, so they will speak it as truth, even under a zone of truth, or even if you got a 47 to your insight roll, you will think that it is true because they think that it is true. And they also write into what happens if you lose the fight. Like every single fight in this, I think for the most part, you can lose and the story continues on. And I like that. That's another thing that a lot of people tend to get wrong about D&D in general is a TPK doesn't mean, okay, everybody get new characters. TPK just means you lost the battle. And a TPK is not the only way you can lose a battle. There are many, many ways that you can lose a battle. You know, if in this particular instance, if they take the rest of the, you know, ship hostage and they say, you know, put down your weapons or we start killing people, well then yeah, that would be a lose condition for me personally. And stuff like that. So almost every single encounter they have if you win and if you lose, and sometimes they will have if you didn't win or lose built into it, and the story will still continue just in different ways. So I really, really like that. Then there's a little bit of betrayal kind of stuff that goes on. And the cool thing about this is every chapter ends on a cliffhanger, very much like serialized stories from like the 1930s, where at the end of everything is like, whoa, what's going to happen next? Find out next time on the adventures of Pirates in Space. Or from my personal childhood, find out next time on Power Rangers. And that's always how, well, depending on the season. The early Power Rangers season, they actually did that, I think, in the beginning, where it would start with, this week on Power Rangers. Tommy is away from the Rangers again because Tommy never seems to be there when the Rangers need them and then just magically shows up at the end for no explicable reason. Will that happen again? Find out this week on Power Rangers. And then the intro starts. By the way, if anyone doesn't know why Tommy was always missing all the time and was always busy or always took off his communicator, it's because in the Super Sentai series that Power Rangers used the footage of, the Green Ranger was a character named Barai. And Barai was dying. Basically, all the Power Rangers were from prehistoric times, and they were put in these, like, stasis pods, and they woke up in modern times to fight Rita, who's the witch Pandora in there. Well, Barai was in a different place, and the cave that his pod was in broke his pod, and so he actually aged. Not physically, but his life got shortened. And so basically, he had something like an hour of life left when he awoke. And the time only ticked down when he was out of his cave. So he would never leave his cave to help the Power Rangers unless it was absolutely necessary. And so footage of the Green Ranger is always at the very end because he was busy trying to not die. And so that's why Tommy... Anyway, so yeah, every one of these chapters ends with a cliffhanger. And like to give you an example, the cliffhanger for this one is they see a thing called a nautiloid. A nautiloid is a Spelljammer vessel that looks kind of like a snail with like a squid, like a snail shell with a squid coming out of it. And it is used exclusively by mind flayers. Which are really, really bad creatures to fight, especially for 5th level characters. You're not going to survive combat with a mind flayer. They're bad. They're real bad. And so the last line, because every chapter ends with some form of box text. The last line is one of the few times the dialogue is good for the most part, and that's because there's almost no dialogue. But the last line of this adventure is, Sartell sucks her breath in through her teeth and whispers her next words. Mind flayers. Here ends chapter 2. I love that. I think it's a great way. And again, this is a really, really effective way to get people excited about the next session because you always end it on a cliffhanger. And that's what this is. The next chapter deals with the nautiloid. Again, I'm not going to go into too much plot, but it's a wrecked nautiloid. So you get to deal with kind of a wrecked kind of derelict ship. You get to find whatever things are kind of lurking around in there. There's some combat. There's some mystery. It's cool. And the nautiloid itself is a really, really interesting ship just in general. And so being able to... walk around it and explore it is really, really cool. If you've seen Baldur's Gate 3, if you've seen some of the cinematics, you see a nautiloid in the opening cinematics. That's a nautiloid, the big kind of weird squid with a shell thing. That's a nautiloid. They're really cool. And so you deal with some jump scares and stuff like that, and then at the very end, when you're done basically looting this ship, another ship kind of shows up, and you find out that this nautiloid hull is bait. Again, minor spoilers there. And so again, the dialogue that's not horrible, and this is how they end it. "A night spider," shouts Captain Sartell. "The Neogi were using this hulk as bait, and we've flown right into their web." Night Spider is another ship that is exclusively used by Neogi, who are another real bad thing. So you have that little next time on D&D kind of thing, and I really like that, the cliffhanger. There we go. And that's the end of part 1. So overall, it's really interesting. Your first chapter is basically fleeing a planet that's starting to be ripped apart by these crystal vines. The second chapter is basically getting introduced to space sailing, and you get attacked by a group, and then you find a derelict ship, and you get some really cool stuff here, and you start kind of piecing together what in the hell was happening on your planet, and then you go into the next chapter. So that was part 1. Moving on. It's not this hard. There we go. Part 2. Terrors of the Void. Part 2 is a little bit more shipbound. And one of the things I think is really interesting, again, when you deal with the nautiloid, it's kind of a red herring, because they go, shit, mind flayers, and then you find out, oh, it's just a crash. There's still dangerous things on there, but you don't have to fight mind flayers, which are real bad. The Night Spider is not a decoy. This is actually a ship full of Neogi, which are really powerful insect things. And so, again, you've just dealt with fighting one ship of full enemies, and then another ship full of creepy jump scare enemies. You're not really set for another one. You need some time to sleep and rest and things like that. So dealing with the Night Spider is probably going to TPK the party, and Night Spiders or Neogi don't tend to take prisoners. They take lunch. So dealing with the Night Spider, the stakes keep getting higher and higher, and the players at this point should probably be tapped out pretty bad. However, at the same time, a couple other ships come in and kind of save your ass. And that, again, a lot of people go, well, Deus Ex Machina, blah, blah, blah. I think that this is a really good, like these first, the 2 chapters previous to this, and then the beginning of this chapter, are really doing a lot to kind of set the stage for this is how Wildspace is. As much as Wildspace is this massive, vast thing, people live in it, and ships are in it, and you're constantly going to be dealing with other ships and things like that. And so yeah, these ships kind of showing up kind of out of nowhere. And there is in-lore explanations for why stuff like this happens. So it's not like it's just like Deus Ex Machina, here's some stuff. But it does kind of give you this idea of you have just entered into, especially for characters that were not aware that Wildspace was a thing before this. This is effectively the bar scene in every Star Wars film. Something that a lot of people probably aren't aware of. Every single Star Wars film has what I call a bar scene. In the original Star Wars A New Hope, Episode 4, when they get to Mos Eisley, they go to find Han Solo, find him in this bar, and the first thing that happens when you get into the bar is it just goes around, and every single kind of alien you could think of is in there. And it's supposed to feel weird, and it's supposed to make the audience feel uncomfortable, because everything about the bar feels weird. There aren't almost any humans in it. It is all aliens. There's an alien band that's playing weird instruments, and that is a bar scene. Every single Star Wars movie has a bar scene. They do it in different ways, but everyone has it. Episode 1, when you first get in when they first get to Tatooine and they start just looking around and everything like that. Episode 2, it literally happens in a bar. You go to the new trilogy. In the 8th movie that I can't remember what it's called. The Last Jedi, that I despised because it's a horribly written movie. When they get to that kind of casino planet, and that's the bar scene. Well, this is the bar scene for Spelljammers. Is that they go into Wildspace and then they get hit time after time by different things that they've never encountered. A Nautiloid, a Night Spider. Now these 2 other ships that have GIF on them, which are hippo people. It's meant to be jarring. It's meant to make them go, whoa, this is weird. Space elves is another thing they had to deal with. So that's the point of this. And so if you view this more as this is your bar scene and pace it like that, it's going to be much easier for your players to accept. Whereas if you just use this as a Deus Ex Machina to get them to the next part of the thing, the players are going to feel railroaded. So understand, in this section, you really need to focus on that. Oh, this is the bar scene. This is part of, you have basically 3 chapters of bar scenes, or 2 chapters and then a beginning of a third of bar scene. So make it feel alien, make it feel overwhelming. That's what the players are going to get it. They do have, because again, a lot of different things could have happened. Again, there's some betrayal in there. There's a chance that Sartell might not even be alive at this point. Other people maybe. They have instances of, okay, if this is true, then these things happen. If this is true, then these things can happen. So I really, really like just how much agency they give the players. No matter really what situation is coming up, they have at least a couple sentences that go, by the way, if this happened, you can do this to change things and it'll still make sense, which I really, really like. And then very quickly after that situation is resolved, you actually get to the Rock of Brawl, and this becomes the more kind of land-based thing. The Rock of Brawl is the it's not new. It's existed in Spelljammers for a while, but it is the city that they introduced in the first one, the Astral Adventures Guide. So they do mention, once you get to the Rock of Brawl, you may want to review the section that talks about the Rock of Brawl. And so you get to do some cool stuff. You can, you actually get to go to Large Luigi's Tavern, that I can't remember what it's called. They introduce a new character that, remains with, theoretically might remain with you for the rest of this particular adventure. They have more really, really bad dialogue. You get some more kind of surprise ambush style things, and you get this is where you first start learning that perhaps some of the information you got before wasn't 100% true, and it starts seeing that thing of, whoa, maybe we can't trust even things that are told to us that we assume to be true. Maybe we need to withhold judgment on the things, because things that we think might be true may not be. And eventually you get introduced to a new ship that you may use. You get introduced to a new Spelljammer. For anyone that doesn't know, a Spelljammer is just someone who pilots a spelljamming vessel. And some Spelljammers, are tied specifically to a ship, because it does take an hour to attune to a spelljamming hell. Or there are kind of freelance Spelljammers that literally just hire themselves out, because spelljamming is a skill. Just like any other piloting skill, it's a skill, and it requires you have to be a magic user. You have to be able to cast spells to be a Spelljammer. So there are kind of freelance Spelljammers, and so you do meet a new Spelljammer that may or may not be coming with you, And again, you get introduced to another character that knows more than you do, that is angry at you, that you have to deal with, maybe through combat, maybe through conversation. Again, lots of different things. I really like the character itself is named Hastane. And if you follow me on Twitter, I made a comment with the artwork for it because it actually, I have friend of a friend, or a friend whose wife, whom I don't know particularly well, but I know of her, does cosplay and stuff like that. And Hastane, I could totally see Angelique, who's the wife of my friend Kiri. I could totally see Angelique cosplaying this character and pulling off really, really well. So I just kind of went on Twitter and goes, anyone else think that Angelique she could totally pull this off? Waiting to see if either Angelique or Kiri responds to it, but we'll see. So anyway, yeah, you deal with that. And then what theoretically can happen, because Hastane shows up with a creature that can deactivate spelljamming helms, you might be stranded in the middle of Wildspace, which is his own thing, and that's where they end the chapter. When you get to chapter 5, they have a little section that kind of describes how you can get out since your spelljammer is not working anymore. Your spelljamming helm is broken, so your ship can't go anywhere, and you do technically have a limited amount of air. It's days and days and days of worth of air, but it's still a limited amount of air, and there's no clue as to when. And also, again, your planet is in the middle of being destroyed, so the longer you just chill here and do nothing, the more chance that you're going to be too late to save your planet. So you're kind of stranded in the middle of space, and you have to deal with it. I'm not going to reveal what they give you an option for how you deal with it, but it's a really cool way to deal with it. And again, this is another one of those things where you really can put a large emphasis on just the kind of alien nature of being in Wildspace and just how weird some things are, and just kind of the beauty that can be contained in space. So yeah, that whole section is really cool. Eventually, to continue the adventure, you do find a place called Topola's Tower, who's a magic user, and he gives you a little bit more information about exactly what's going on, what the crystal things are, and exactly what needs to happen. Tupola's a cool character just in general. She has birds. She likes birds. She has lots of birds. So totally see Holly Conrad playing that. I constantly cast characters in my brain of people that I know of. So I totally just went, oh, cool, Holly. But anyway, so you kind of deal with that, and she gives you more information, stuff like that. And again, the dialogue is written really, really badly, so don't use any of it. Come up with your own stuff. And then another kind of surprise. You decide to go back to your ship. Another surprise encounter happens. Again, I'm not going to reveal any details about it because, again, I want it to be a surprise to everyone. But it's a cool encounter. And again, it's another one of those encounters where there's a bunch of different ways to get out of it. You can just deplete hit points if you want to go that way. You can try to be trixier about it. There's a lot of different ways to deal with it. And that's one of the strengths of this adventure, is just how many times they give you 2, 3, 4 different ways to deal with a single situation. And then, you get told, oh, by the way, you're about to go into a situation where you need some friends. So you find out that there's Topola has a previous relationship with someone, and they may be able to help. They're exes, and so there's that kind of aspect to it. And they have to go. They have to go find this captain named Garganhale. who just so happens to be a vampire. So that's cool. And you eventually kind of find out that Garngale's fleet was decimated. And really all Garngale has is his very, very beat up ship. And that's where the chapter ends. And then the next one is basically kind of trying to convince Garngale to help you out because you need his help and other things like that. And Garngale has got a really, really great kind of relationship Topola with Topola, which is really, really cool. And I like Garngale as a character. And again, there's lots of things. They have a pirate code in here that I really, really like. So the pirate code, I'm just gonna read the articles of the pirate code. Article 1, don't eat each other. Article 2, no hymns. Article 3, cowards consequences. And Article 4, no shipboard conflict. It's a cool thing that I really, really like. And then again, there's a little bit of betrayal. You have to kind of figure out what's going on. And yeah, more stuff. And eventually, after you get Garngale's after you get Garngale's ship back, you find a princess. Yay! And that's where part 2 ends. So yeah, overall, part 2 again interesting. It starts off with the kind of end of that bar scene. You get to find some new ships and make some new allies, and then some surprises happen, which are always fun. So. Moving on. Part 3, Chaos in Doomspace. This is where you start to learn the actual plot of what's happened. And even here, you have that unreliable narrator poking their head in. You find out the people that are actually responsible for the planet. You find out exactly why it's happening. Again, not going to go into too many details. Buy the adventure, play it. It's fun. But effectively, you need to go to Xaryxis, which is where the Astral Elves, that's their home place, because they're the ones that are causing this. However, the Astral Elves just so happen to have a fleet. And you are basically going against not just like a city, you are going against an entire planet of elves, Astral Elves, that are ready to kill you. So this is like declaring war in a country when you have a single ship. So after dealing with a princess and finding out what you can, you eventually are told, hey, you know where we can go? We can go to Doomspace. Doomspace is another Wildspace system that has weird stuff going on in it, and it has a bunch of different factions. Like, well, if we can convince the factions to join us, then we'll have our own fleet. We were hoping to use Garngale's fleet, but his fleet just got shot to shit. So we've got a single ship. It's a nice ship, but it's one versus an entire fleet of the Astral Elves. So you decide to go to Doomspace to deal with that. When you get to Doomspace, crazy shit happens. One of my favorite tropes in anything ever. There's an arena there, and you get forced to fight in the arena, which basically turns into 3 consecutive fights that your players have to just kind of deal with, which is cool. And the third fight is so good. Again, I'm not going to reveal the kind of plot twist of it, but when you read the description of the arena battle, it's so good. It's so good. It's funny. Because again, you've just dealt with some pretty decent combat, and then so the third thing comes and it starts off with this complete misdirect, and it feels weird for the party. It feels weird for everyone else, and then it goes, oh, here's the real, and it's funny. It's really good. And then at the very end of the arena combat, the big baddie of the campaign shows up. and that ends chapter 8. And then chapter 9, you deal with the appearance of the head of the astral elves. And then after dealing with him, you have to convince 5 different factions to try and join you. 5 different factions that are all fighting amongst themselves. They all hate each other. So the majority of chapter 9 is just you having to play politics with these people. And each faction has a representative, and each representative has a bunch of kind of talking points that they're interested in. They have specific gifts that you can give them that can sway them. And this section, every single one of the representatives can choose to join you, or can choose to not join you. And you can go at it. You can go in the next section alone, or you can go in the next section with an entire fleet. And each group brings a different set of ships. Like there's technically 6. So there's 6 different things. So the 6 different groups, like to give for example, each one, like the Arakakra are one of the factions, and they bring 5 Shrike ships with them. Whereas the humans would bring 3 space galleons. So not only do you get different makeups of your final fleet, but they give you kind of listings of all the different ships that you might be. And as much as for the DM this may sound like, oh my god, this next part's going to be really, really complicated, it isn't, and I'll explain that when we get in there. But it is really, really useful for the narration that you're going to be doing in the next chapter. So yeah, really, really like that. And at the very end, again, because they need to give some sort of cliffhanger ending, you randomly see a red dragon with a rider flying at you, and that's where they end it. And this is the one thing that I'm not particularly fond about because of how it's resolved in the next chapter, but that is part 3. Overall, like I said, I live for politics stuff. I really, really enjoy politics because, again, my experience in business in general, and my experience in a lot of different things. Like I did some work with charities and stuff. I actually raised $330 million for charity at one point. And then the city planner for Milwaukee said, yeah, but we don't want you to give us $330 million to build your charity. So we're going to prevent you from doing anything. And then all $330 million just went away. Really sucked. Yeah. That's what I said to the person that's in their camera going, wait, you got $330 million and a city told you no? They wanted to build high-rise apartments instead of the really awesome facility that we designed. Already had people in line to build it for us. And another whole story. If you guys want to hear that story, let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll do a video on it. But yeah, so I love, like, politics is a part of everything. Doesn't matter what job you have, they're going to be politics. And I'm not particularly fond of the politics I had to deal with in retail. Like it was amazing how little the actual skill and ability of an associate mattered in whether or not they got promoted, or whether they got a store, or whether or not they even got rewarded for things that they did. So much of it was politics. And this is true in literally every single field. So the idea of just politics not existing in D&D is not something I'm good with. And politics in D&D works a lot better than politics in real life. Politics in real life is always stacked against you. 100% of the time it is always stacked against you. Unless you are already really, really powerful. And so it just sucks to deal with. In D&D, things are generally fair. To a point. Things will be stacked against you, but there's always a chance of success. Where in real life, there's very rarely a chance of success unless you're really, really good and don't mind manipulating people in ways that may make you feel bad later. So yeah, I love politics stuff in D&D. I think it's really, really fun. And so I love this whole thing. I think it's great. Moving on. Go close that. The final chapter, part 4. Saviors of the Multiverse. And this starts off chapter 10. First of all, I mentioned the Red Dragon. The Red Dragon is just a massive red herring. The character, you can attack them and they get mad and they fight. If you don't attack them, they show up. Now, I understand this is just spoilers. I don't care. I'm kind of upset about this because it could have been cool. If you don't, they land on the deck, they make a joke, then they leave. They might give you something nice, and then they leave. And that's it. That is the entirety of this dragon just existing in this. And it was a really cool idea. And they have like plot and lore for this particular character that shows up literally for one line of dialogue. One line of poorly written dialogue because it's box text. So yeah, they literally just added that in to give you a cliffhanger, and you didn't need to. It could have just been as easy as the cliffhanger is. If you've ever watched First Contact, there is a scene where Picard decides to disregard his orders, and he takes the Enterprise into a fight with the Borg. It might not have even one of the Star Trek movies. And so he has this little kind of monologue where he talks about the crew kind of preparing. It might have been I think it's First Contact. Anyway, so he has this whole monologue where you see this montage of the crew getting ready and everyone's getting phaser rifles and everything like that, and everyone's getting ready, and Picard is kind of monologuing over it, talking about preparing the crew and what's about to happen, and it ends with something along the line of, and like hundreds of captains before me on hundreds of ships preparing for war, I await the dawn. And it's a really beautiful scene, and that's how they could have ended the last chapter was. Use that line or use something similar to it. And captains throughout history, I await the dawn. Because you're getting ready to go toe to toe with a fleet, and you have your own fleet. So that would have been a perfect cliffhanger, but they had to add in this red herring, literally red herring, because it's a red dragon. Just to go, well, what will happen next? And again, I get that that's kind of how the Flash Gordon serials worked and stuff like that, but I think it's dumb. There's no chance for this character to join you, to be anything more than, hey, here's a line of dialogue, and hey, here's a single nice thing for you. So, yeah, dumb. They have a section on Wildspace Xaryxis, Xaryxis space, and is that all of Chapter 10? Oh, yeah, no. And so the entirety of Chapter 10 is the fight with the fleet from the Xaryxian fleet. And it's epic. It's really, really cool. They have other things where, again, because you have a princess on your ship, some of the enemy ships might be open to saying, hey, look, we've got a royal on board. Maybe you shouldn't be killing us. And so there's a lot of cool things that you can do in this, but it's this massive, massive fleet battle that plays out pretty well. The way they describe it here, it's pretty good. And again, you can win, or you can use, or win, or you can lose. The word use is in front of me. Sorry. You can win or you can lose, and this plot continues on, and it's really interesting. The end of the end of the chapter ends with you actually getting, because the fleet is before the capital. So you make your way through the fleet, whether it's as victors or as prisoners. You make your way through or running away, because that's another option you have. You make it to the actual capital itself, and that's where chapter 10 ends. When you get to chapter 11, You get there right as the former king has died. It is his funeral, and the new ruler of Xaryxis is going to be crowned. You have the princess, who could be one of the rulers. The big baddie is her brother, and you basically get to kind of go all Game of Thrones. It's like, well, her right to the throne is better than your right to the throne, and stuff like that. Eventually what happens is there's a challenge, and you have to meet the challenge, and you get to fight a really, really cool character themselves. You have a trial by combat. You get to fight a thing called a Zodar, which is really, really cool. And again, whether you win or lose, the story is going to continue on, which I really, really like. And it is going to change how things go. So it doesn't mean that what you do isn't important. It means what happens to you is going to be based on what you do always. Not so much that, well, win or lose, the same thing happens. No, it doesn't. It means that you can lose and the story doesn't just end. So I like that. And that's effectively chapter 11. Chapter 12, the final chapter. Again, betrayal happens. Not going to reveal what it is, but a betrayal happens, and you find out the actual way to stop your world from getting destroyed. It happens to involve a very, very large cost. Again, I'm not going to talk about it here. Buy the book, read into the things like that to find out what it actually is. A choice is made. A big thing happens, and then you get to deal with the aftermath. And again, depending on the choice you make, your planet might not be saved. You can make the choice to not save your planet and deal with those consequences, and that could turn into a really interesting story. Or you might save your planet. You know, again, there's so many different ways that this can end. It's really, really interesting. And at the very end, they have a thing that says further adventures. It just gives you kind of two hooks to continue a campaign after this. They're not really detailed hooks. They're just like, whoa, what about this? If you want to run another adventure connected to this, what about this? So yeah, that is part 4. Moving on. See, now I drink water. Now that I'm out of my ginger ale. So, final thoughts. Overall, like I said, I think this is one of the best written adventures that they've published. Not so much because the story itself is absolutely amazing. The story is good, don't get me wrong. But I would say, Critical Role, the Netherdeep story, I think that story is a little bit more interesting than this one. However, the pacing and the structure of this is so perfect. Again, even if you don't want to run this adventure, this is one of those things where reading through it and looking at how they pace things and things like that can really be a benefit for you to maybe learn how to better pace your own adventures, to really be able to figure out when you're planning for a D&D session, well, exactly what should I plan? What should I expect to happen in one of my sessions? How much should I expect to get through? Because that's one of the most difficult things about being a DM is the fact that your prep work may or may not be useful depending on what the players do. And you may prep way too much for them and they never get to the stuff that you prep because they go in a different direction. Or you may not prep enough and you have to fly by the seat of your pants for an hour. So this is really, really good, especially if you run this with a group of people that you intend to actually run your own Kick-A campaign with, because you will get to know those players, and you already know how long the adventure is supposed to take and how much in each section is prepped for a 2 to 3 hour session. You also get to find out, okay, this is what a 2 to 3 hours of, this is what prep for a 2 to 3 hour session, what is designed to be a 2 to 3 hour session looks like. Now, what does that translate to my players? Well, maybe your players get through that 2 to 3 hours worth of content in 6 hours because they really enjoy the role playing and talking to the characters and stuff like that. Or maybe they get through it in an hour and a half because they're really efficient in what they do. All of this is useful information. All of it. So yeah, as a whole, I like this for different reasons than I like Call the Netherdeep. Call the Netherdeep is a really epic story. And it's really, really interesting and fun. And the idea of a kind of rival party that you deal with, I think, is an interesting thing that can be used in really any campaign to make it that much more fun. The story itself is fun. I would not call it massively epic, but it's fun. But I think the best part about this book is the structure that it's built around. You can learn a lot from running this campaign. And I'm not saying it's not fun. It's cool. I enjoyed reading through the entire thing. I got excited reading through it. It looks like a fun campaign. However, I think the best part of this campaign is the structure and just the tools that they use to create a feeling in the campaign, which I don't think I've seen done better in a pre-written adventure. This really does feel like a Flash Gordon adventure. And that's hard to do. Again, without turning it into a parody, because Flash Gordon is very campy, and it's very, very easy to flirt with the line of parody. This never flirts with the line of parody. It never feels like this is turning into a joke. It never feels like this is making fun of something. This feels very rooted in a real story that just so happens to be fantastical, and bombastic and slightly campy, but not to an absurdist degree. There's jokes and things like that. I almost see the approach almost kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where yes, there's an epic story that's being told there, but it's constantly interrupted by little bits of humor and little bits, little side stories that don't really change the peril that the world is in, but it lets you get to know the characters a little better, or it lets the audience kind of take a breather and just kind of enjoy themselves while also continuing on the plot. And that's what I see this as. I think, again, the structure and the tools that they use to create mood and feeling in this are really, really well done. The story itself is fun, is enjoyable, is interesting. The dialogue is bullshit and sucks, but the rest of it is really, really good. And I think, unless something massively happens at Wizards of the Coast, I think going forward we can just expect that any dialogue written by Wizards of the Coast is going to be bullshit. The only time I can think, the only book that I think has been any good in the dialogue space in the last couple of years has been called The Netherdeep, and that wasn't written by Wizards of the Coast. That was written by Mercer and a team of other people. Don't get me wrong, but Mercer is a really good writer, and specifically to him being a voice actor, he's really good at dialogue. So yeah, other than the fact that the dialogue is shit, it's a great adventure. I really recommend running it. I really recommend playing it. I think it's really, really cool. There's twists and turns, and there's an unreliable narrator, and there's an arena series in there, and then there's explosions and running away from bad things, and it's really, really cool. So yeah. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, remember, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your favorite what is your favorite thing that you're not supposed to like? I will give you an example. There is a movie. It is called The Core. The Core is not a good movie. There's no way to say it is a good movie. It is not a good movie. It is utter crap. Basically, what happens is, spoiler alert here, the government designs a thing that allows them to weaponize earthquakes, and it destabilizes the core of the earth, and makes it stop spinning. And so what they have to do is they have to get into a worm vehicle, just a really, really long, skinny thing, and go to the center of the earth and set off bombs to restart the core. Everything about the book is wrong. Everything about, the core stops spinning and the world goes to shit, and just everything about the movie is wrong. The movie is campy. It actually has a pretty great cast. This is Aaron Eckhart and Hilary Swank and I'm trying to think of the other people in there. It's got a remarkably it's got a remarkably good cast for what it was, and it's a nonsense movie. And I love it. I have watched it so many times. I have purchased it multiple times. It is just that good, folks. And by good, I mean it's horrible. So that's what I'm asking. What horrible thing do you enjoy that you're not supposed to? The Super Mario Brothers movie is another one that I unironically love. And there's no redeeming qualities in that movie. There isn't. So let me know in the comments down below, what unredeemable thing do you just love? Otherwise, that's all for me today. I'll see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.